Yeah.
My favorite.
It's Judd's Hockey Show.
And welcome into a very special edition of Judd's Hockey Show, where ordinarily we talk about the wild, the good, the bad. There's always plenty of stuff, but this is a special edition because we're going to be joined by an old friend of mine from going way back when, Kevin Allenspach, who I knew during our time together at the U during my very brief matriculation that I've talked about before. And then he went to the Pioneer Press, the St. Cloud paper, and he has now written a book about a subject near and dear to both of our hearts. And there's a tie in here, but I'm going to show you. It's Mirage of Destiny, out February 20th, right?
Yep. Actually, it's supposedly on some shelves already. I saw they had it down at the Mall of America, Barnes and Noble. So yes, it's
awesome.
out.
Now, this is a story of the 1990-91 North Stars. If you are a youngster, and perhaps there are several of you who don't know about this, this is the North Star team that made an improbable, miraculous, and I think now in the current National Hockey League, probably impossible run to the Stanley Cup Finals after being one of the worst teams. In fact, I think they were the worst team to make the playoffs that season. And the tie-in between Kevin and I, as far as this goes, is I was an intern, a very bad one, for the North Stars the season before, and Kevin was an intern during the season that he's written this comprehensive book about, again, Mirage of Destiny. All right, let's just start, man, because, I mean, we're going to be talking about the old days here, the North Stars, Met Center. What influenced you all of these years after to decide to write a book about perhaps the most, as Patrick Royce has said, perhaps the most improbable sports run of any team in this state ever?
Right. And I guess before we get started here, Judd, thank you for having me on. We're old college buddies back to the days of, what was it, WMMR and KUOM or whatever.
Had some drinks at the Big Ten when I don't think we were supposed to. It's gone now, so we can talk about those days.
When I was, talking about college basketball and I didn't know what I was talking about or whatever, but yes, some great days. And yes, I ultimately sort of succeeded you as a, PR intern with the North Stars. And, I mean, that was going to be my senior year. I did wind up having to come back for an extra couple of quarters before I graduated. But, I was walking through the basement of Murphy Hall one day and I saw the posting for this internship. And I'm like, I can't pass that up. I mean, I knew what I wanted to do, probably pretty much similar to what you knew that you wanted to do. You wanted to go into broadcasting. I wanted to be a sports writer. But man, I couldn't pass up the idea that I could see what is it like to be on the inside of a real major league sports team. And, I've talked to a few people here recently now that the book is out, and it's kind of like you almost have to put an asterisk by that because, the Timberwolves were in their second year, the season I was there, the first year when you were there. Yep. The Vikings are always going to own Minnesota. The Twins were only a couple of years off a World Series, and then we're going to win it again in the fall of 91. The North Stars were a way distant fourth and probably even behind Gopher Athletics, honestly. Mm-hmm. And, the attendance was terrible. I think you may have touched on that. The attendance was terrible that year. So, it was really, it was an experience that I went through at that time. And Norm Green became the owner that year. And to me, he's really kind of like a modern day Montgomery Burns a little bit, or a hockey Montgomery Burns. Mm-hmm. And between that experience, him bringing his dogs to the office and, people walking on eggshells, wondering whether they were going to get fired for the littlest thing. And then the team coming back and making this miraculous run. When I left that spring, I was like, man, somebody someday should write a book about this and tell about it. And then it became even more so. Less than 2 years after they lost in the finals, the team is gone. He took them to Dallas. So then I'm like, man, this really deserves to be told. I didn't have the opportunity until the pandemic. And so the pandemic rolled around. I happened to be laid off right in front of that. And so at some point I was like, hey, what am I going to show for my pandemic time? I got to have something here to do. So I picked up this project.
Wow. Well, first of all, it's funny because a year before you saw that small card in Murphy Hall, I saw the same exact card, and that's how I found out. Right. I'm walking through, going to class, bored by the whole school experience, unfortunately. Yep. And I saw the same thing, and I'm like, I got to call this. And Joe Janis was the PR director then. Okay. Now, Joe gave way to Tim Bryant, who couldn't get along with the Wolves folks. He was supposed to be the first PR guy. And then I think by the time you got that card, it was Joni.
Yep.
But I remember being in Met Center. In fact, I was in charge of clips.
Oh yeah,
clips,
sure. Yep.
Which were not on a computer, ladies and gentlemen. You literally were there clipping newspapers. And I was in charge of clips when the original story, and I believe it's referenced in your book, broke via USA Today.
Yes.
That the Guns, and I still to this day don't know how USA Today got the story, but that the Guns were looking for major improvements to the building, or they were threatening to move this team. So I remember looking at that, and I'm like, well, hold on a second. I'm in this building, and this team's going to agree. So you talk about some weird stuff, but let's talk about your time with Norm there, because I miss Norm entirely, thank God.
Yeah.
But so were you there when it looked like it was going to be Howard Baldwin and Bellsburg, and then it transitioned to Norm, or like how did your experiences go? Because I was on the agate desk at the Star Tribune at the time, and I remember when Norm was firing people left and right. Joni got fired, brought back, but they let a ton of folks go. So what was your experience there, being young Green? And then seeing Norm Green gas the entire building, basically.
Well, and what was your experience when you were an intern? Were you there for the entire season, or were you there for a portion of it? Because I think the season that I was there, they did have somebody who served as an intern probably like late in the summer through September, October. And it was like November when I actually got hired. So
you know who that was for me?
Who?
The person who was there when I got there? Dave St. Peter.
Oh, that's right. Yes, absolutely.
Dave St. Peter was that, and so I came in like October.
And that's, you talk about another real minor footnote to this whole thing. I mean, he winds up getting married to Joni Preston.
Yeah, and becoming president of the Twins.
Your boss at one point.
Crazy.
But yeah, so I guess to try to answer your question, I mean, I came on. It was November before I rolled around, and Dan Stukel was the other intern that they brought on at the same time as me, and it was you really kind of had to check your mind at the door, because right at that point, Kathy Gainey had gotten brain cancer, so she was undergoing her surgery, and Bob was having to step away from the team for a week or two, and you didn't know what was going to go on with that. They were late in the stages of Star Stakes. I know that one of the first releases that Dan got to write was one of the Star Stakes people hit. And the Electric Stars, Norm had seen that at a Timberwolves game, so why can't the hockey team have its own dance troupe or whatever? And that's fine, except, they're not going to do it on skates.
Yep.
And, there was, they would put out a piece of AstroTurf between periods, and the guys would get out there on this AstroTurf and try to do their dance routine or whatever. But so there was a lot of things going on there that were just sort of surreal, and none of it really affected the attendance. I mean, I did the math in the book. I mean, the amount of money he spent, like over $250,000 on the Star Stakes.
And Star Stakes was a giveaway each game, right?
Right. It was a lottery, because if you remember, Judd, they had like the spotlight would go flying all over the arena, and then it would settle on a seat. And they had a couple other college kids. They must have been the marketing interns or something, because they had to wear a North Stars jersey, and they wore a goalie mask, that looked like Jason from Friday the 13th. And so they'd run around with an envelope, and they're going to hand it to whoever the spotlight would settle on. Well, the only problem was probably at least half the time it settled on an empty seat. So if you look at the money that he spent, I mean, like I said, it was over $250,000. And I think, the attendance did go up a little bit from the time that they started that, which was in maybe early November, something like that. But that was about at the time at which the team started to play maybe a little bit better. Plus, hockey attendance typically improves a little bit as you get deeper into the winter. So, I think, he probably spent like $8 for every extra fan that he did get to come into the building, which is probably not a great return on your money.
No. And in fact, I was there. I remember being in the press box opening night. I want to say it was against Brett Hull and the Blues.
Yep.
And there was like 5,000 there.
Right.
I mean, nobody. That's what's so hard if you're a Wild fan who doesn't remember the North Stars, that's what's so
Right.
hard to like get your head around.
Right.
That place was empty, and yes, it gradually built up, but there must have been no season ticket base whatsoever.
I think they might have had between 2,000 and 3,000 season tickets,
Wow.
maybe something like that. And I guess the other thing to put that in perspective that's important too is there wasn't a team in the league that wasn't drawing twice as many or more. So I mean, it's not that the North Stars weren't getting any people to show up. I mean, it was not even close. I mean, every other team that would come in, they're like, what's going on? And speaking of which, the Star Stakes lottery, I mean, opponents would come in and you'd have opposing players and assistant coaches, and they're buying tickets just so that they can get into the lottery. So, that tells you kind of how crazy it was at one point.
Wow. So when you started the book, because you talked to a ton of folks from the team,
sure,
front office, etc. Who cooperated? Who surprised you? Like Madano played a big role, but Mike seems like a really decent guy. So I guess I'm not surprised. But like as far as going through phone calls or sending out notes, who cooperated? Who you probably thought might be a long shot?
Well, I wanted to start with Mike because I figured he's the only Hall of Famer who was a player on that team. And if I could get him to fall in line, a lot of other people would probably follow. Unfortunately, that happened. The other key was Bob Gainey. He was tremendous, spent hours on the phone with me. As a matter of fact, I just got a nice email from him the other day. He's had a chance to get the book in his hands and read it. And he's very complimentary. And that was really nice to hear. I guess I'm kind of proud because, I set out and it was maybe a monster task really to begin with. But what I wanted to do, this was my premise. I wanted to at least try to contact every player who played in a regular season or playoff game, all of the coaches, all of the trainers, the equipment people, that sort of thing. Because I mean, these were people that I was, as we were interacting, on a somewhat regular basis as PR intern. Mm-hmm. And then I wanted to also add in the front office people who worked in PR, which during my tenure, I guess theoretically Lou Nanny would have been at the top of the PR department because that was when he got moved from president down to whatever his title was that season. And then Elaine Waddell was sort of like the director of marketing. And then you had mentioned Joni had gotten fired during the wave over the summer. And after about 3 days, they realized, wait a minute, we probably need her. So they brought her back. And so she was in charge of communications. And then she didn't have anybody else. I mean, it was me and Dan Stukel. I mean, we were the two interns. That's literally the only help that she had. And now when you look at it, I mean, the Wild actually have a pretty thin crew. I think they've only got 3 or 4 guys who really work on, what you would call PR for the hockey department. But, in comparison to, the Twins or the Vikings or, other major sports, I mean, it is a bare bones operation. And that was probably somewhat by design, too, because like you said, I mean, Norm came in and just slashed and burned and got rid of a lot of people.
Yeah, because despite their faults, the Guns did spend. Like PR
sure.
when I was there was Joe Janas, and then I think he transferred out to a different department. Tim Bryant took over from the Wolves. Joni was the assistant.
Right.
It was like 2 of us. So, but I mean, there were 2 full-time employees.
Right.
And then Norm came in and just fired everyone. And in fact, I think this also is in the book. There were, when I was there was PR offices and stuff in the Alpha building, which was literally across the street. Yep. I think Norm gave up those leases, correct? And moved everything, consolidated everything back.
So when you were coming to work every day, then were you going to the Alpha building?
At first, the first few months we were in the Alpha building when Joe Janas was there.
Okay.
When Tim Bryant took over for Joe, because Joe was in Alpha, and then I was at like an outside, secretarial desk.
Yeah.
And then when Tim Bryant came in, Tim, rightfully so, said the PR guy should be in the hockey building.
Probably.
Like I should know what's going on. And so they granted him that wish, and I think they built an office across the way. But as you recall those North Star offices weren't very big.
Oh no,
Like they were small. In fact,
And
we
I mean,
once had
you were underground. There was no windows.
there was one day that so Joni had a small office. Tim had the bigger office, and then the interns were just sort of like outside.
Okay.
And there was one day a guy in like a snowmobile suit comes booking through, like running full speed, and it's like, what the hell? And he ran right past us. Security comes. It was a guy with a gun who had just robbed the daily like cash pickup from Met Center.
Did you get Steve Ruane after him?
I was like, I could have been shot. I'm glad I didn't get in his way.
Oh man. Well, yes, like you say, I mean, they were Spartan offices, and Dan and I actually shared a sort of a cubicle that's probably not bigger than my bedroom office here. So I mean, we were pretty much back to back, and definitely no frills. But I guess going back to your question about who participated, I felt very fortunate because off of the guys who appeared in the playoffs, there were only 3 that did not participate in the book. I got the entire coaching staff, most of the equipment guys, couldn't raise Dave Supernaut. There's a few people that kind of slipped through the cracks that way. And I try as I might, I wanted to get Bobby Clark, and I couldn't get through to him. But for the players, it was only Neil Broughton, and I'd talked to Neil quite often in the past. I mean, he was an ambassador for the Wild a little bit when they first came to be. And so there were times when he would come through St. Cloud, or I would see him at a game somewhere. And this was always kind of a subject that I would engage him on when I got the chance. So it wasn't as though I hadn't talked to him about it before. And I know Neil's had, maybe some issues. I know, he's gotten divorced and, some things going on with his personal life. So who's to say, how much or whether he wanted to participate. But so it would have been nice to have him involved. Kurt Giles, ironically, I mean, I suppose I could have went and staked out an Edina hockey game and tried to, jump him when he came out of the arena or something like that. But I tried, I emailed, I called, and couldn't get a response.
He was scratched. He was scratched a lot, right?
The thing that I'm thinking there is he was scratched for the entire finals.
Yeah.
That was his last year with the North Stars. He was the captain, and got scratched for the finals. And I think he, between that and the fact that they didn't win, I don't think it's a real pleasant memory for him. And so that, might have been, I'm not making excuses, but that might have been why. And then the guy, if there's 2 people that I didn't talk to that I regret, that I wish I could talk to. And if I ever get the chance, maybe we'll have a sequel or something like that. One is obviously Norm. But, Norm, I don't think is ever going to want to talk about this. I don't know that he's ever going to trust anybody to talk about this. Yeah. I spoke with people in the book. I mean, I'm pretty sure Ralph Strangis is still in touch with Norm. I know Dan Stukel sees him occasionally. So, I've told these guys, hey, I'm fine. Just tell Norm that this happened. And if he would ever want to talk about it, heck, that would probably be worth another book, honestly. So, I didn't get him, but didn't expect. And then the other one is John Casey. And I don't know what your relationship with John Casey was, but, he's from Grand Rapids. He's a northern guy. And in my tenure, when I was there, he really didn't enjoy dealing with the media. No, I don't think very much.
I had the same exact experience.
Yeah. I mean, you'd go in there, and even after games that he would win, the media would crowd around him, and he'd be talking into his chest like this, and you couldn't hardly see his face or whatever. And he also had some bad experiences, one of which may have happened with Patrick Royce, but I know there's a few columnists that he felt really burned him while he was here. So, and, maybe the same thing there. I mean, I think, as the goalie, certainly that team would not have done what it did without John Casey. I mean, if you take one guy out, if you take him out, there's no way that happens. So he should really feel, positive about what happened. But again, probably not something that he wants to remember. And actually, I'll throw a little sort of special scoop in here, Judd. I don't know if you've read the book really cover to cover, but the little scoop that I don't believe has been reported anywhere publicly. In the finals, the North Stars were ahead 2-1 going into Game 4 at home. And that's the reason why I started the book with the lead up to Game 4.
Right.
And if the North Stars would have won that night, they would have been able to clinch the cup in Pittsburgh for Game 5. So before Game 4, you had a lot of wives and girlfriends that are saying, hey, I want to be there when this is going to happen. Okay. Now that team, wives and girlfriends, had not traveled with them at all since they went to Russia in training camp. And I know that there was some guy, some guys were probably ambivalent about it or whatever, but I know that there was also some players and the coaches, for sure. Bob Gainey is like, you don't screw with this,
Right.
I mean, whatever is working right now is working. You don't mess with it. Okay. Well, and I've got like 8 guys in the book. It's not just me saying this. These are other players. Something happened the day of Game 4 between John and Brenda Casey. There was an argument, something. John comes to the morning skate the day of Game 4. They had 3 children who were all like under the age of 7.
Mm-hmm.
They are all with him coming to the game day skate the day of Game 4 because I don't know if Brenda got mad and left or what the circumstance was. Supposedly he told Jim Johnson he didn't have any other place to leave the kids, and that's why he brought them there. And Jim was like, hey, you bring the kids on the off days or whatever or after a game, but that's a no, not leading up on the day of a game. You don't bring your kids into the
finals game.
Yeah, this is Game 4 of the Stanley Cup Finals.
Whoa.
Okay.
Yep.
And then now you got to put that in context with what happened, because if you recall, Game 4, they gave up 3 goals in the first 3 minutes, and from that moment on, they were really on their heels the rest of the series. And I don't want to paint that as too big of a smoking gun or something like that, because like I said, they would never have been there without John Casey. And there's guys who are also quoted in the book. Neil Wilkinson said that's a bunch of BS. John Casey was professional enough that wasn't, whatever happened wasn't going to affect him in the way that he played. So you kind of got guys on both sides of that, but I think there's no doubt something happened, and I guess that's part of the legend.
I will say this: Jim Johnson at the time is a veteran. Wilkie was a kid,
right?
So I think I would, as far as your interpretation, I think I trust Jim Johnson more than and I mean, Neil had talent, don't get me wrong, but he was young at the time.
Right. Yeah,
he was really green.
Absolutely.
So that is interesting. So as
there was many more guys, to your point, and that's a very good point. There were many more guys on the Jim Johnson side. I mean, guys like Shane Shurla, guys who had been around a little bit, and they, even to this day, I mean, they don't want to hang anything on John, but it's obvious to them something changed, something either impacted his focus at that point, or the other thing, I mean, John wasn't a very big guy. I mean, he was like 5'8", 155 or something like that. And at that point, he had started every game and played a lot of minutes. And plus, like I said, they went to Russia for training camp. So by the time you got done with that and the exhibition season and the regular season, and then you go all the way to the Stanley Cup Finals, I mean, the team had played like 110 games. So, who's to say how ground down he was?
So as you went through the process and started to talk to sources and people about this and did research, did what you found for the book, did it sort of solidify as you recalled it, or was there a lot of stuff in retrospect that you didn't recall, or at least was interpreted differently through a 2020 lens, for instance, than it was 1991?
Well, and here's where I got to give a nod to not only Rachel Blount, who you worked with at the Star Tribune for many years, but Gary Olson, who I worked with for many years at the Pioneer Press. I have tremendous respect for the beat writers. That's what I wanted to be. I wanted to grow up and be a beat writer. And, they did, between the two of them, I thought did a tremendous job of really reporting all the little nuances, I mean, there used to be notes at the end of the stories back then. I think the Star Tribune used to run them in agate type,
We did.
Sometimes those were the most interesting things in the whole story or whatever. But, so you go back and, I went through and, even from back then, some of them are probably your clips that you clipped out. When I left the North Stars that season, I made a whole bunch of copies. I had like 3 big 3-ring binders all full of clips from that time. And so I guess, in looking at it, from a distant view, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it puts it in perspective a little bit, but I mean, I personally, and I think you, and I think most people who followed the North Stars that at that point in time, I mean, that was crazy. It was, and the numbers kind of bear it out. Like you said at the beginning of the show, the NHL is different these days, with the shootout points and all that kind of stuff. It's almost impossible to compare. But like, the NFL, it's going to be rare. You might maybe get a 7 and 9, or well, in these days, maybe an 8 and 9 team, since they play 17 games. That might make the playoffs. They would have to then go on and play for the Super Bowl to have any sort of equivalence. Right. And I don't even know if that's fair, because you only play a handful of playoff games. I mean, in hockey, you got best of 7 series. And the NBA, it's only happened like 3 times, I think, that a team with a losing regular season record has played in the finals. Now, hockey, I mean, it happened quite often, because this particular season that we're talking about, I mean, 16 of the 21 teams made the playoffs. So, I mean, it was harder not to make the playoffs than it was to actually make it. But, nonetheless, that to me is just one little thing here that makes this a story that is unique, that I hope, one of my purposes for writing this is I just, someday I think somebody, if they want to look back and find out, geez, what the heck happened with these North Stars? How did that, that sounds crazy. Believe me, when you dive into this book, you're going to find a lot more crazy than you ever thought. And at least now it's there for, posterity.
Well, and just the playoff run itself, like, forget the finals, because that was the Chicago team that was the best team in the league, right? Yep. They went through Chicago, St. Louis, and Edmonton. And like that in itself is a gauntlet.
St. Louis was only 1 point behind Chicago. So you had the two best teams in the league, basically. And then, I'm still to this day amazed. Going into the playoffs that year against Edmonton, they hadn't won at Northlands Coliseum in 10 years. It was 1980 was the last time that they won a game in Edmonton. So, and this is sort of the other thing that, may come through, and, you know me, Judd, so you probably kind of knew this even at the time, but it's like, I mean, I knew by, I might have started in November, but I think I knew by January that, hey, my future ain't in PR.
Oh, God, yeah, I was the same exact way. I was terrible at PR.
I'm going to stick this out as best as I can, but I want to have a job where I tell you the truth.
Yeah. Well, and request things. Don't get requested. Can I get game notes and stuff? I wanted to be the one requesting game notes, damn it.
Right, exactly. But, so there was a lot of even the regular season left, and I knew this was not going to be my future, but I wanted to, put in my time and end it on a good note, blah, 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 get on, get back to the Pioneer Press and get on with the rest of my life. So I'm figuring, okay, they're going to play Chicago. This is done. I'll be back to work before you know it. They beat the Blackhawks. And I'm like, okay, well, fool me once, fine. But yeah, St. Louis will take care of business. I mean, Brett Hull scored 86 goals, so this has got to be where it comes to an end. And they beat St. Louis. And by that time, as you remember, it was like the state was on a drug. I mean, the people who were coming to the Met Center and the people who were following that team, it went everywhere. It went crazy. It went viral. And it literally was like a drug that people needed. They needed their fix.
And tailgating came back.
Right, exactly.
That's the thing too. The Dome at that point was what, 9 years old. The Mall of America, I think, was still going up at that point. I don't think it was done yet. But that brought tailgating back for a glorious spring, which was huge, because there was, at that point in time, Vikings Twin, there was no like special lots. So this was the place to go basically get drunk before the game and then go in.
And that's the thing that a lot of people don't recognize or realize either is, it was kind of a younger crowd, honestly. I mean, you had your corporate ticket holders or whatever, but it wasn't nearly like what it was with the Timberwolves or what it, ultimately got to be or what it is today, where you have so many ticket holders that are like that. The crowd out at Met Center, and I'm sure you remember, I mean, I would say it trended from about maybe 16 to maybe 35, something like that. I mean,
tickets were expensive, but they weren't that expensive.
No, not at all. Not at all. I mean, you could, I'm trying to remember what they were off the top of my head, but even during the regular season, I think the top because Norm was going to have a $50 ticket that year, and he got such blowback with it that they said, okay, we're not going to do that. So I think the most expensive ticket, if I remember correctly, it was like $28.
Mm-hmm.
Contrast that, I mean, God love the Wild, but I mean, look at what it's going to cost you to sit in the lower bowl over at the X.
Oh God. Yeah. And families went. I'm not trying to say that they didn't, but the X is families, kids have jerseys, Wild jerseys. The North Stars was a different thing. It was far more of a hard drinking Bloomington suburban, crowd. So what is your favorite, like, of all the things that you saw and the weird things, what's your favorite Norm moment? Do you have like a Norm? Like personally from afar, I always loved the fact, and I've talked to Patrick about this, that they decided to knock out the press room lunchroom to make that a auxiliary press box because they didn't want to eat up seats.
He fired Eric Cruz because Eric Cruz called the city of Bloomington and wanted to make sure that it was legal for them to do it. He wanted to get a permit. And Norm didn't want to wait, so he fired him. Said, we're going to just do it anyway.
Oh my God, I didn't know that.
So, I mean, that's an example. I mean, there's a lot of them. I mean, here's a guy who is so wealthy. I mean, he's got his own jet. He's got his own pilot, goes around with him. He's got he drives a Rolls, and he doesn't drive. He's got a chauffeur that drives him. I mean, how does this fit into Bloomington, Minnesota in 1990? I mean, this just doesn't really compute to me. I suppose maybe you had, I don't even know. I mean, what executives in the Twin Cities would you have had that would have been playing in that sort of pool? I mean, it was just different. And then he had his two dogs, Rupert and Charles, and he'd bring his dogs. And I remember, I think it was Charles. I don't remember which one, but I know I was working one day and the dog came around the corner and he started barking at me like crazy. And it's like, go away.
You're like, just get out of here.
Well, and I felt bad because I think the guy who was his pilot, if I'm not mistaken, I think his pilot also kind of doubled as his chauffeur. And there was times where we would see this guy who obviously he's got a pilot's license. I mean, he's got a high level job, or he's an educated man. But part of his job apparently was to take the dogs out for a walk so they could do their business. So, I mean, think of the come down that is. I mean, I'm a jet pilot, and yet I got to take this guy's dogs for a walk so they can take a crap.
Not enough money in the world that you can be paid for that one. When did the because I subscribed, but I forget the details. When did the team go on pay-per-view for the playoffs?
It was just for the playoffs. It didn't start. It started against Chicago, so they started right away.
Because they've been like Channel 9 or something, right?
Right. They were on and actually
an MSC.
An MSC, because during the season, most of the road games were on Channel 9. They would have a handful of games that were on MSC, and you've written a ton about sports media, Judd, so I don't have to remind you of what that was like, where MSC is trying to get a foothold in Minnesota.
So in my year there, Jack Ferreira, who went to the Sharks, was GM. Dean Lombardi, who also went to the Sharks, was assistant.
Yep.
Dean Lombardi, when the North Stars were on MSC for road games, Dean had to stay at the Met to watch the games because in his apartment, they didn't yet get it. So he like bitching complaints like, I got to stay here tonight to watch the game because my effing apartment doesn't get MSC.
Well, he was by no means alone.
No, I know.
It was rare for people to get Midwest Sports Channel at that point in time.
Yes.
And so, the playoffs roll around and of course, Norm, and I think Pat Forcia played a little bit of a role in that. I mean, this is a revenue stream that they could look at. The thing of it is, I don't think they never thought they were going to go all the way to the finals. But once you start down that path, you can't then really say you're not going to do it, especially when you see the dollars start to come in. Because as the whole thing ramped up, again, by the end of the St. Louis series, by the Edmonton series, I mean, they're getting 30, 40,000 subscriptions at $10 a pop, or $12 a pop that are rolling in on this thing. So, and Patrick called him out on that in the finals. I know he was the first person to say Norm Greed, and it really is kind of a shame when you think about it that, a deciding game of the Stanley Cup Finals, you couldn't watch it in your hometown without having to pay $12.
It was Sports Channel America showed it, right? But it was but they blacked it out here because, like, now you couldn't black that out here. But I think back then, and that's the thing is, John Ziegler, the guy before Bettman, who was president, not commissioner, in all his infinite wisdom, cut a deal with Sports Channel America, which nobody got. And
Right.
I remember I was a 20-year-old in Roseville in an apartment with my girlfriend, and I had to subscribe to pay-per-view North Star games, and they put a Sports Channel America NHL playoff package together that you could all. I was 20 years old. I'm spending like $50 for hockey. What an idiot.
Well, I'm sure your girlfriend wasn't happy you weren't spending more money on her.
I probably don't think I told her. That's fine now. We've been married for like 30 years,
well,
so
I guess everything
worked out fine.
Everything turned out well.
It all worked out fine. Again, the book by Kevin Allenspach, Mirage of Destiny. It's a great read. If you're a North Star fan, it's a must read. If you're not, you can learn a whole lot. Out February 20th, and plug your events too, because you got a bunch of stuff to commemorate the launch of the book.
Yeah, the Wild has been great. They've invited us over for the Saturday's game against Buffalo. Starts at 4:00. They're going to have us in the concourse there, unveiling the book really for the first time, and then they're going to carry it in the hockey lodge, so it will be available there.
Nice.
The official launch party has been set for Tom Reed's. That'll be 4 to 7 on Tuesday night, the 20th. And then there's actually going to be a launch party at the Blue Line up here in Sartell on the 27th from 4 to 7 as well. I'm sure there'll be other events, and the other thing I wanted to try to squeeze in here a little bit too before you're done, Judd, is the story of that year is the first half of the book, but the second half of the book, I mean, I was really influenced when I was growing up. One of the reasons I became a sports writer was Roger Kahn, who wrote Boys of Summer. I'm sure you're familiar with that. He covered the Brooklyn Dodgers.
Great book.
In the 50s. 20 years later, he went back, tracked all these guys down, went to go visit Jackie Robinson and Duke Snyder and Carl Erskine and all these people, and wrote about what their life was like after that, And I think that's what I tried to do with the second half of the book. All of these guys, and I was amazed at how many of them have fantastic stories to tell. Some of them terrific, some of them heartbreak, but I mean, everybody had some really significant things to say. And as an athlete, you don't often hear about what happened ever after. I mean, these guys stopped playing. And if you're not Mike Madonna, who's a Hall of Famer and still sort of in the spotlight, most of these guys, nobody knows what happened, and they weren't making that much money back then. I mean, as we didn't make very much as interns. I can't believe you. I don't know if I got enough to pay for my gas to get out to Med Center. And
there's no way. You took a loss on that job. So did I.
But, a lot of guys, they had to go on to second careers, and many of them are still working, So, like I said, it's kind of twofold. It's the story of that year, which was incredible. But then it's like, what happens to you when you get that close to your goal, whether it's a Stanley Cup or whatever your goal in life is. And, I feel kind of akin to this myself. I mean, hey, I wanted to go on and cover the Yankees someday. I wanted to work for Newsday or the New York Times or whatever. Mm-hmm. Well, that didn't happen. Okay. But I did the best that I could. I had a pretty decent career. Now that I look back on it, I can live with it. And I think that's sort of the message that I got from a lot of these guys that I talked with. Sure. Would they have liked to have had a Stanley Cup ring? Absolutely. But, you kind of have to, you have to own where you're at. You have to own what happened and take some pride in the fact that you were there. And, there's some value in that.
Great stuff, man. Fantastic. Always fun to talk about the North Stars, who are more and more forgotten, aside from the fact that I think the younger generation likes their colors. So that's good. When the Wild wears them, we're all pleased again.
Exactly.
Mirage of Destiny, Kevin Allenspach is the book. It's the story of the 1990-91 North Stars. Kevin, appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon on Judd's Hockey Show.
Thanks, Judd. I really appreciate this.